Good morning, dear friends. It's Friday, the 24th of December, a time where in the world, well, let's just go to the Hebrew day, the 20th of Tevis, time where we say, Anu mashkimim v'hei mashkimim. There's other people that are celebrating, and it's a good time to draw a contrast and to bring extra Kedusha, extra holiness through our Torah study into the world. Today also happens to be an important day in the broad Jewish calendar because one of the most consequential Jews to ever live, the Rambam, passed away on the 20th of Tevis. And so this day is commemorated as the yahrzeit of the Rambam, who inspires Klal Yisrael, who created one of the most important foundational halachic works. It's a work that we reference frequently to gain the Rambam's take or to gain the Rambam's unique understanding and to have greater clarity on the topic that we're studying, the Gemara. Today's is yahrzeit Zechusa Yagain Aleinu. Today is also the yahrzeit of two past members of our shul, Reb Mendel Portansky, Mendel Ben Chaim. So I'll mention his name, and for Aliyas Nishmasai, and I'll also mention, maybe some of you knew him, Arthur Rausman. His wife is still in touch with us, and she comes to shul. And Shlomi Yoetz, who's the Gabe, was a close friend of his. Avram Eliezer Ben Elimelech. Today was his yahrzeit, and his neshama should have in Aliyah, and we're davening for good news, for healthy news, for happy news, for all of Klal Yisrael, particularly the members of our Chabura, V'chol Asher Lahem, and mentioning particularly prayerful wishes for Refuah Shlema for the names that we have on our Talmud broadcast. Leah Bas Rita, Malka Bas Rivka, Chaim Baruch Eliezer Ben Rusa Esther, and Ludmila Bas Najada, and for all of Klal Yisrael, only good news, healthy news, and happiness. Today, we're going to take a grand pivot. We're going to move and take a big leap out of an ongoing discussion that we've been talking about for the last many days, weeks, and perhaps even months. We've been talking about carrying and what makes an item worthy of carrying, to consider to have been carried. Are there dimensions, different dimensions for different items? When is the person's personal perspective irrelevant? We've talked about methods of carrying. We've talked about food, carrying humans, and the way a person's intention, his kavana interacts with the circumstances. Is it l'tzoyrich gufa or not? If you carry it in an awkward or atypical manner, kilachar yadai, or a person's foot or the rest of their body. All of those discussions we have covered extensively. And today, suddenly, the Gemara is going to drop us a Mishnah that perhaps seems to be somewhat out of left field because it's not at all on the topic of carrying or what's being carried. We're going to be talking about acts that are an extension of goizes, of shearing, as we'll see in just a moment. And as we will explore this new topic, it seems to be, it's a big change of direction. And so I'm excited. I'm going to hit mute over here. And I'm excited to jump into this new discussion, this new topic. And thank you all for being here on this auspicious 20th of Tevis, 24th of December. And I just want to add one more thing, which is that I'm not sure if many of you will be able to come, for example, those that are far away or otherwise being mindful of where they go. But tonight we're having a l'chaim and a kiddush, a standing kiddush at the shul outside on the new property. So if anybody's local and they're feeling up to it and their doctor or best practices permit, I want to invite everyone to join us for a l'chaim on the new property. If circumstances, location, how you're feeling, or what your doctor advises do not allow you to join us, have no fear. With Hashem's help, we will have future opportunities to share a l'chaim together in celebration of our communal miracle. But if you're up to it, I just want to extend an invitation as well. Reb Beryl, you wanted to say something before we jump
Rabbi,
into the
historically, when we seem to change subjects completely, is it possible that when they compiled what we end up in our Talmud, they left out stuff in between?
Well, the change of topic actually is not born out of the Talmud. It's born out of the Mishnah. So the compiler of the Mishnah chose to insert this Mishnah here. And there's always a discussion about why, if the topic changes, what might have happened. So as you recall, we had a parak of Rabbi Akiva, and it was a bunch of seemingly isolated and unrelated topics. And the commentaries that we perused explained to us that really there is something in common, different halachot that are inferred from verses, and so we frequently have this kind of discussion. And so let's take a peek at the Mishnah. And we can try to brainstorm what the connection, if there is any, between the Mishnah and this text. But hold on, I'm sorry, I'm sharing the wrong screen with you. Hold on, let's see if we can find the correct screen. Bear with me just a moment. All right, we'll just change text. Screen, Sefaria. All right, Talmud on Sefaria, Shabbos, continue reading. Here we go. Just as we find a place to remind you, we closed out a discussion yesterday about an analogy between, and we left off with a little bit of a struggle with it, but we're not going to revisit it right now. Maybe at the end we can revisit it if you like. But basically, it was an analogy between saras, leprosy, that is validated and confirmed and diagnosed based on white hairs within a skin malady, and one is prohibited from plucking that hair. And how many hairs? So 2 make 1 impure. So if there's 3 and you pluck 1, are you liable? If there's 4, that was the discussion. We brought an analogy. We brought a halachic association between that and the impurity conferred by an olive volume of impurity. What if you cut it? If you take part of that away, or if you take something that's on top of the minimum shear? And that was the analogy we presented yesterday. Why don't we start with a clean slate? New Mishnah, new subject. Hanoitel Ptziparnov Zubazu. This is, by the way, one of the hardest Mishnahs and one of the most challenging halachas for many, because various people have different inborn, what do we call them? Bad habits of messing with messing with nails or hair. And those that struggle with such habits will find this Mishnah to be a challenging Mishnah. Let's take a look. A person who removes his fingernail, zubazu, with his hands, as we'll see, the Gemara explains, or a person who bites their nails. V'chein sarai, similarly, a person who removes hair with their fingers, with their hands. V'chein sefamai, similarly, a person who plucks their mustache. V'chein zikanai, or one's beard. V'chein hagoideles, similarly, a person who braids. V'chein hakoicheles, and similarly, one who applies kuchla, who applies makeup or eyeshadow, which we long ago referenced and talked about the word kol, I think, right? V'chein haposekes, similarly, one who puts blush, says Rabbi Steinsaltz. Let's see Rashi for a moment. V'chein sa'aroi toilish sa'aroi shabiyadav, he plucks his head hair with his hand. V'chein hagoideles, sa'ara, braiding hair. V'chein hakoicheles einaha, making up one's eyes. V'chein haposekes. So the word posekes is a challenging word, as Rashi tells us. So again, what did I say posekes was according to Rabbi Steinsaltz? We said it was one who applies blush. Rashi says, Yesh miraboisei omer misakenes sara b'masrik. There is a commentary that says it is combing one's hair with a comb, or combing with her hands. But there's an entirely different interpretation. A process of applying a product on one's face which leads the face with a ruddy complexion. Rabbi Steinsaltz translates that as blush. The difference here is, I think blush usually is something that is applied, excuse me, whereas Rashi's interpretation is not that you're applying something, but rather there's a kind of chemical application, or actually here he says you put a kind of dough or putty on the face, and when one pulls it off, it creates this complexion. And so those are a bunch of acts. We haven't said what the halacha is for all these acts, but brace yourself. Rabbi Eliezer Mechayev, Rabbi Eliezer paskins that all these acts, removing a fingernail or hair, etc., making their hair in certain ways, Rabbi Eliezer says Mechayev, Rashi, one is liable for what? Bikula mechatos. With all of these, one could receive have to bring a chatos, because Rabbi Eliezer says these are all biblically prohibited and part of the malacha of the malachas of Shabbos. The Chachamim oyster mishum shvus. However, the Chachamim disagree radically, well, not radically, they disagree with Rabbi Eliezer. Not in what if the behavior is permitted or prohibited, but they argue about what basis the prohibition is. They say it is a shavus, it is a rabbinic restriction, a rabbinic prohibition. And Rashi says, before we get all excited, Tamod Rabbi Eliezer mefarish b'Gemara mishum mai mechayev. The Gemara is going to the Gemara is going to discuss and explore why Rabbi Eliezer would consider these activities to be biblically prohibited. And if it's biblically prohibited, it means that it is one of the Lamed Tes Melachas, one of the 39 Melachas. So again, I don't think you'll accuse me of false advertising when I tell you that to go from talking about carrying and methods of carrying what you're carrying to talk about plucking or biting nails or pulling hair is a very, very different topic. Now, I know someone here is going to tell me that actually yesterday's Gemara also talked about plucking. It talked about plucking hair of a leper, correct? But I just want to point out that is a discussion that is from the Gemara, whereas our Mishnah and the previous Mishnah has no reference in the Mishnah to this idea of plucking the hair. What I want to do now, of course, I welcome comments, but let's also open the Mishnah. I want to open it in its own text, but let's see if I can get that happening. All right, here's the Mishnah. The way it's recorded in the Mishnah, it's all one final Mishnah, and in the Gemara it's divided into two. By the way, I forgot to mention that we are on 94b, Tzaddik Daled Amud Beis. So here is the Mishnah. So what I'm looking here is to see if any of the Mishnah commentaries weigh in on this question. Rambam doesn't. Bear with me just a moment. All right. No. All right. So now we'll go to our comment. So now that we've read the Mishnah, we're going to see the Mishnah's analysis in the Gemara, what precisely these behaviors are, why precisely they might be prohibited or permitted. Actually, there's one thing we didn't do, which is okay. I don't know why they do this again. Tosfos. Let me see if they provide us the Tosfos. They don't seem to be giving it to us here. Yeah, I don't know why they don't. Hold on. I'm going to have to read the Tosfos outside of. All right, I'm going to read for you the Tosfos. For some reason, Safaria is not providing us this text. I shouldn't complain because Safaria has done a wonderful job. So an occasional failure to link a text is not the end of the world. There's a reason why Safaria doesn't link it. I believe because Safaria connects this Tosfos to. No, let's see. Okay, I see. In the Gemara, it's printed later on. All right, Paisekes. What did Rashi say Paisekes is? Anyone recall? Rashi said Paisekes was either combing or a kind of blush. Tosfos says, "Hey, Nira, I don't like this interpretation. The interpretation that it's brushing does not sound right. Because the Gemara is going to discuss this act of Paisekes, and it's going to sound more like a weaving activity, a braiding activity. And therefore, he rejects, without giving much of a extensive alternative interpretation, he seems to reject that it is coming. Okay, fine. Let's start the Gemara. Any comments or questions about this?
Rabbi,
Yes.
I presume we're trying to figure out how these things connect to the work on the Mishkan.
Indeed, that's going to be one of the first questions. Although, anyone have a fast response? Anyone have a fast response? What might be the connection between?
What was the question?
All right. Rebberal says our first order of business is to figure out what's wrong with cutting nails or hair or brushing, etc.
Well,
And
there's
so
a
I said-
question of cutting on Shabbos, no? I mean,
Yes. I'm going to give me 1 second. There's a poor person that's supposed to come pick up a donation. I just need to see if this is them.
It's strange, Menachem, because they specify that you're not using anything. Obviously, if you're using something, you pick it up, you carry it, whatever.
Yeah, but I don't know if it's cutting, maybe whatever you separate, you're cutting, it doesn't have to be with a scissor, with a knife. I mean,
what is interesting is that in commentary it says without scissors. Actually, it implies that with scissors is okay, but I don't think it's okay.
Now, I would assume it also depends whether it's with the Lameter Melachot, there's the Av Melacha, and then you have the Tolada, the derivative. So that
also, they prohibit cutting with teeth, and I cannot think about anything they did in the.
So I don't think the Isser is what you use to cut. The Isser is the cutting itself. So whichever thing you use would be prohibited.
I'm sorry, I stayed muted over there. Shkoyach, this is a very fruitful and helpful conversation. It is, because indeed, it's hard to find any immediate act in the Mishkan which entailed using one's teeth or one's hands to pluck. If and in as much as there was cutting or plucking or whatever, it was all done with a specialized tool. And so, therefore, what the first instinctive reaction here is that all of the activities enumerated in our Mishnah most certainly don't seem to deserve the title Av Melacha, primary category of Melacha, which are the Melachas that were in the Mishnah. The most they might qualify for would be a Tolda. I think, as Dr. Stamler wisely pointed out, I believe it was Dr. Stamler. I was partially distracted. And so all of these are going to be presented, at least the primary understanding here is that they would be either a Tolda or maybe not even a Melacha at all biblically. And that's going to be our question. They certainly don't have an immediate activity in the Mishkan, but are they close enough to specific melachas that are in the Mishkan to classify either as a tolda, which is a secondary or offshoot of the primary activities of the Mishkan, or according to the Chachamim, not even, they would most likely be prohibited as a dirabanan. So let's begin tackling.
Let me ask you a question. When it comes to the melachot in the Mishkan,
yeah.
So let's take cutting or separating, for instance.
Okay.
I would assume that's the issue of cutting, not the utensils that you use to cut.
So
What difference would it make what kind of utensil you use to cut?
So it's not the question isn't which utensil, it's if you use a utensil. And again, we'll get into this at length, but there's a big distinction between an amateur activity done by hand and a tool which implies a certain kind of precision and professional execution. And so
let me ask you a question.
Gemara,
Why can't I rip? Why can't I rip on child if I just use my hands and rip?
so the answer is you can't pluck or tear or do any of these things by hand. But our issue here is what's the biblical status? What is the oraita situation? And it's possible and plausible, and there are those that say that the difference between doing something by hand and by a tool are so vast that maybe doing something by hand wouldn't be considered a malacha. However, there are others that say it would be. So let's take it step by step, because the Gemara is going to usher us through each issue step by step. I just wanted to get the general discussion going because that's going to assist us in our navigation of the Gemara. And I'm also going to do, although maybe this is incorrect, but I'm going to choose to give us a little bit of a spoiler alert. And let's see how the Rambam, not that everyone agrees exactly with the Rambam, but let's see how the Rambam presents the themes of the Mishnah. And it'll give us at least a little bit of a picture of halacha l'maisa. Although, of course, remember that whatever we see in the Rambam, a lot of it is inferences and nuances that are born out of the Mishnah, and he's taking specific positions which may not be resolved at the point where we're holding. But I want you to see something. Person plucks, removes nails, hair, mustache, beard. So basically, it's three different words for hair. Your hair on your head, your hair on your mustache, your hair on your beard. They are all a tolda. It's not a primary, it's not the main, it's not the way that these things were done in the Mishkan, but the Rambam understands, and the Gemara will discuss this, that this is considered gozes. It's like shearing, just like shearing animals. We removed the hair or we removed other items, so therefore this is considered an offshoot of gozes. Vehu sheyitol bekli. However, when would any of these actions be considered a tolda, a malacha that's an offshoot of gozes? Only if it's done with a tool. But if it was done by hand, with one's hand, whether he did it to his own hand, or his own beard, or his own head, or another person, patur, he is exempt from the biblical act of a malacha. Doesn't mean you should do it, but it is not a biblical malacha, which seems to reflect the opinion of the Chachamim. The added commentary is about the strong distinction between a vessel, a kli or not. The same question is about removing a wart, whether he does it with his hand or a vessel is pater. And okay, this is the later conversation, so let's hold off for now. Suffice it to say, this is the Rambam's basic presentation of the halacha. As we'll see, many of those details are born out of our Gemara's further analysis. So let's jump right into the Gemara. Amar Rabbi Lazar, let's talk about fingernails. The prohibition of removing fingernails. Machloikes biyad, this is only the debate of if it's a biblical or rabbinic prohibition is only if one does it by hand. Aval b'kli, but if you use scissors or a nail clipper or whatever people used to use back in the day to cut their nails, chayiv. Everyone agrees, says Rabbi Lazar, that one is chayiv for cutting or trimming their fingernails with a kli. Rashi, machloikes biyad, v'hosha noitlan biyadai, v'loi b'kli, when a person removes a nail with his hand or his teeth, not with a scissors or nail cutter or whatever the implement was back in those days. Who the patri rabbanan? That's where the rabbanan would extend a patur. They would say that it is not a biblical transgression of Shabbos. She'ein derech geziza bekach b'chol. Normal people intending to do an act of geziza, of goizes, of shearing, would never use their hands or their teeth. They will always use an implement. And so the Rashi says, being that the notion of geziza, goizes, of shearing, is so utterly associated with a tool, we're willing to extend the definition of goizes, or we'll create a subcategory, a tolda. If you use a kli, but if you use your teeth or hands, that would not have any similarity, that would not have any commonality with goizes, with shearing. Because again, the primary prohibition is shearing, and so that's how Rashi explains. The Rabbanan say it's only a derabanan, it's not a deraisa, because it is so not like the biblical Mishnaic shearing. So the Gemara says, Pshita, your comment, Rabbi Elazar, needn't be stated because zo bazu tenan, the Mishnah is explicitly only talking about a person removing their teeth or hair without a tool, without a keli. Why does Rabbi Elazar even need to make this comment? It is so obvious. And the Gemara says, actually, it needed to be made. So the Gemara is not refuting what Rabbi Elazar is saying, but the Gemara is explaining to us the chiddush of what he's saying. Mahu b'tema, I might think, Rabbanan b'klinami patri, maybe the rabbis are so not concerned about cutting nails, or they so don't see cutting nails or hair to be an extension of goizes, that they would even permit cutting your nails on Shabbos with a kli. Therefore, Rabbi Elazar specified machloikes biyad aval b'kli chayiv, that the whole discussion is only biyad. So why indeed does the Mishnah mention zubazu, that a person is removing their nails with one hand, removing the other? To teach us the extent of the strictness of Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says that you are chayiv not only when you use a vessel, even when you use your hand, which is so distant from the typical shearing, and yet Rabbi Eliezer is willing to cast a wide net and include that as the tulda, the offshoot of goizes would be removing even with one's hand or teeth. Kamash malan. And therefore, we are taught both to realize that the Rabbanan's leniency that only extends to when it's done biyad, and we have from here the full extent of the chumrah, of the stringency, of the strictness of Rabbi. I'm sorry, I misread. Let me read that just for a moment. Everything I said is true, but the way I read is wrong. The reason why Rabbi Elazar needs to tell us that the whole debate is about biyad is because I might think that the Chachamim are very lenient and we're only trying to play up the stringency of Rabbi Elazar. Kamash Malan, therefore Rabbi Elazar clarifies. Everyone agrees that when you use a kli, you're chayiv. However, when you use biyad, that's where the machlokes is. Rabbi Elazar says you're chayiv. That's also a biblical prohibition, and the Chachamim say no. This is only Rabbanan, Midiraisa, one is exempt. Rashi, Ma'u Tema B'Chlinami Patri Rabbanan. Maybe the Chachamim say removing human hair, removing human stuff is not goizes, because goizes really is only about an animal. And so we're not done with the discussion yet, but just to understand that the question is, how creative are we going to be? How far do we extend a similar activities to be considered an offshoot of goizes of shearing? And so on one hand, anything that has to do with a human you would think maybe is not related to goizes, even if you're using your hand, because it's human and humans are different than animals. Alternatively, you might say that it has to be entirely identical. The act of using a vessel, a kli, Rabbi Elazar says no, even though it's a human, even though using your hand, it's still close enough. It's the idea, because I guess the question really is, what is the definition of goizes? Is goizes the act of removing a hair from an animal? And therefore, when a person removes something, it's pretty similar. Or is goizes the act of removing with a vessel, with a kli, with a shearing scissors? And when a person does it with their hands, it's very, very different. So again, that was just a complicated way to say that the machlokes is exclusively about biyad, with your hand. And we gave a little bit of a reason why, according to Rabbi Elazar, you're still chayiv. It's still connected. It's still the idea of removing biological material from a living creature, person. And the Chachamim say no. If you're not using a kli, it's not similar to goizes, because goizes is by definition, shearing is by definition an act done with a vessel. From Rabbi Lazar further says, when our Mishnah says that it's plausible that one would be chayiv for removing fingernails is only la'atzmai. But if you're doing this to your friend, please never bite your friend's nails or pull off your friend's nails. So Rabbi Lazar says, Libri Hakol Potter. Everyone agrees that this is not considered like goizes. Rashi. Rabbi Lazar says when a person does it to themselves, they're chayiv. A person may be able to do a precision job, biting or removing their own nail. But doing it to someone else, it's going to be so unprofessional, so jagged, so not clean and smooth like a cut that was done with a kli, and therefore everyone agrees that you're potter. Rashi he cannot find the precision to make the nail look really nice and perfect.
Rabbi,
Yes.
this is a malacha that the guy has no benefit when he does it for someone else.
Yeah, Rebel, it's kind of, what they say about picking your own friends? Okay, we'll stop there. But anyways, so there we have it. Rabbi Lazar says everyone agrees, everyone can get on board with the fact that you cannot remove your friend's nails. No, not that you can't. Removing your friend's nails is going to be so unprofessional and so unideal if you're doing it biyad that it's not considered a malach at all. It's not considered a biblical act of goizes at all. The Gemara says, Pshita, what is Rabbi Lazar telling us? His statement is utterly obvious. He's not adding anything to the conversation. You know why? Because all I need to do is read the original text of the Mishnah, and I would know exactly what Rabbi Lazar is trying to tell us. You know how? You know why? Because look at our Mishnah again. Look at the strategic, clear diuk the Mishnah uses. Hanoitel, si por nav. What does si por nav mean, Dr. Stamler? Whose nails?
It means his own nails.
His own nails. So do I need Rabbi Lazar to teach me Ulpan? Do I need him to teach me Ivrit? Rabbi Lazar is not coming to teach us Ivrit. He's coming to teach us something that should be profound and not obvious. And what he's saying here sounds utterly obvious and evident to all. That's the question of the Gemara. Pshita, Siparnav, Tanan. The word of the Mishnah is Siparnav. Everyone knows it's only his own nails. Rashi, Siparnav Tanan, Shel Atzmo, his very own nails. The Gemara says, no, it's not so simple. Maybe Rabbi Elazar, whose instinct is to be extremely machmir, his instinct is to be extremely expansive of the definition of the tulda, the offshoot of goizes, and so maybe he would extend the definition of goizes or the prohibition of goizes to even be cutting your own nails, even cutting it biyadayim, even if it's your friend. And maybe, how do I define the word siparnav? Maybe Tziparnav is only to show us how lenient the rabbis, the Rabbanan are. Therefore, Rabbi Lazar comes to tell us no. Everybody agrees that when it comes to another person's nails, if you're doing it without a tool, everyone can agree it's your potter. This is not a biblical malacha. This is not a tulda of goizes because it is so far removed and so not akin to goizes, to shearing. Primarily because goizes shearing is done with a certain degree of precision. The cut is smooth. The cut is at an exact level. Could you replicate the removal if you do it by hand? Depends who you ask. Not quite, but epis. But if you're using your own hand for somebody else, that's going to be very difficult to get it precise. That's what the Mishnah is teaching us. So everybody agrees that if you remove your... So you can imagine now there's going to be a whole industry of people biting their friends' nails. But I think, thankfully, I don't believe that is a thing. First of all, because it's prohibited midrabanan, and second of all, that would be revolting in my opinion, and I'm sure we can all agree with that. But that is the first discussion of our Mishnah about removing one's nails. So again, to recap, according to Rabbi Lazar, removing your nails via dayim with his hands or his teeth, that is a biblical prohibition. According to the Chachamim, It is only prohibited midrabanan, but it is not a malacha. It is not a tolda of a malacha. What if? Does everybody agree that using a kli is not a malacha? I'm sorry. Does everybody agree that that when you use the kli you're chayiv, when you use the tool you're chayiv? Yes. Even though it sounds obvious, you might not read it that way, and therefore Rabbi Elazar clarifies for us. Everyone agrees. You use nail clippers, chayiv, and then we say, you know what? Everyone agrees that if you use your hand to remove your friend's nail, you're potter. Isn't it obvious? The Gemara says no, it's not obvious, and therefore Rabbi Elazar helps us out by giving us these clarifying comments on the Mishnah. I'm sorry, someone wanted to say something.
What is the status of the person who allows his fingernails to be cut?
You're saying according to everyone that you're not allowed to use a kli for it, or even
it is allowed to do this for another person. And my question is, what is the status of another person? Is it allowed to let another person to cut your nails?
That's an interesting question. I think the easy answer is no. The question is, why is the answer? Is it because you're not allowed to facilitate another person doing a malacha? Or is it because there's a specific rabbinic prohibition? Most likely it's a mixture of the two. In other words, all that we're discussing here and saying that there's a machlokes, it's only about if it's a biblical prohibition. But it seems like there is a clear rabbinic restriction anyways. And the Gemara is of the strong position, and halacha takes the same position, that we take rabbinic prohibitions as seriously as biblical prohibitions. The only reason why it's relevant is because sometimes the consequences, the mice are different, or the teshuva process is different, or under certain unique circumstances, the chachamim provide a waiver. But otherwise, as far as warranted and unwarranted behavior, everyone agrees that you should not do a rabbanan. Rebberal?
Rabbi,
Yes.
it's not so simple. If
Why not?
the person cutting the other person's nails is an expert, it's a completely different scenario.
You're talking about an expert nail biter?
Removing nails, whatever method they're using, if he improves the situation, you can't just slug it up.
Well, actually, we can, because the Gemara is creating the definition of what is a malacha of geizes, and everyone is agreeing that using your fingers or your teeth on your friend is not considered a malacha. I know what you're saying. You're saying, Rashi, explain to us that you can't do a perfect job on your friend's nails. And Rebberal, you're saying, okay, but let's say you could. Let's say you're an expert nail biter. I bet you there are people that might define themselves as expert nail biters. They should go on America's Got Talent or something, maybe. No. But suffice it to say, it is so not typical. It is so far removed from the idea of geizes that everybody agrees. I suppose, Rebel, the answer is that because it is so far removed from the idea, the image of geizes, everyone agrees that that's not considered geizes. Even if there's a hypothetical, I imagine, of an expert nail biter.
Let me ask you this.
Yes.
Can you prepay? Can you go to a salon where a goy cuts your nails on Shabbos?
So it's an interesting shaila. I don't want to give you an absolute halacha l'maisa answer, but the answer is no.
I figured that, but
the answer is no. I'll tell you, in general, there's a question of if there are certain actions that are prohibited, can you seek out that service to be done to you? So, for example,
well, that's what the goy shel Shabbos is anyway.
So, if we want to get complicated, a goy shel Shabbos is entirely not simple.
No, you can't tell him. He has to know in advance. You can't tell. You can't.
But there's no. Again, it's a little bit out of the scope of my expertise. But there is no scenario where you could convince the Gentile that he's biting your nails entirely for his own benefit, to the extent that it might be acceptable. There's usually, and again, I don't even want to step into Amir al-Akum, which is, I guess, the idea of a goy shel Shabbos. They're extremely restrictive when a person can utilize the services of a Shabbos goy, and it is extremely restrictive how one may solicit a Shabbos goy services. Suffice it to say, I don't see how you can, right, a doctor, you're prepaying, and somehow it's going to come out that it's entirely for his own benefit. I don't see it. Maybe a scientist that needs to do some kind of study on nails, and he needs, I don't know. But suffice it to say, the default answer is no. The Gemara, I'm sorry, another comment here? The Gemara is going to now continue discussing the next topic, which is, someone say something? I'm trying to see if my headphones are. All right. Let's move on to the topic of hair. You're not allowed to remove hair. The question is, how much hair is considered removing hair? With a nail, there's a little bit more of a easy definition or more substantive. Rebecca, are you saying something?
No.
Okay, but I can hear you, so that's good. Okay. But when it comes to hair, how many hairs is considered removing hairs? And so we already have a little bit of training here because we talked yesterday about plucking out hairs. There was an entirely different context, an entirely different purpose. But generally speaking, is one hair significant as an act of?
So, Rabbi, here's the segue from yesterday's Mishnah. No, you said they weren't connected, completely different. Here's your connection.
Rebel, I already bavarned your time. I already negated this by saying that this is the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi is the one who structured the Mishnahs. The discussion about the hair was really in the Gemara. So our question is, why does Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi structure it here? But it's a good point. Your point is well taken. I actually predicted that you would say that. By the way, usually a sign that we're learning, that a study session or a subject is going well and that we're growing in our Talmud literacy is when we start predicting the questions or the comments of the Gemara or the style of the analysis. That's usually a good sign. All right, V'chein Sari
I have
here.
a question.
Yes, Eli, go ahead.
Are you allowed to put nail polish on your hand, on your nails?
On Shabbos?
No.
In general?
Before Shabbos. Yeah, as a man, I'm not saying that we do, but men with suits and they're clean cuts, they're going for business, they like to do their nails. They do
complicated.
Hairs,
you're asking is what you're asking. I'm not going to answer your question, but your question is a male allowed to get a manicure? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Because their hands need to look presentable, and so therefore you're saying that today it is a unisex activity. It's not exclusively for one gender or the other, and so you're making the case, which is a compelling one, that this is not considered beged isha, or so. That's a good question. I don't want to stake a position, not because I think it's prohibited but just it's a little more complicated than a yes or no to do justice to the topic. So we're going to shelve it for now, but it's a good question.
Thank you.
All right, v'chein sari, hair. Tana, how much hair is considered cutting hair? What amount of hair cutting is considered having a haircut? Hanoita moli plizug. This is what we're taught. The Tosefta teaches us that it's when you remove the amount of hair that fills up a scissors. Malay pi hazug. It fills up the mouth of scissors. Chayiv. Well, the Gemara says shkoyach, but that wasn't very helpful because how much is malay pi hazug? How much hair fills up a scissors? Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Yehuda says 2 hairs. That's the amount of hair that fills up a scissors. There's a problem because there's a brisa that Rashi is going to fill in for us. Let's back up for a moment. Tatiana, thank you so much. If you fill up a scissors full of hair, you're chayiv. What's chayiv? Rashi says, B'Shabbos, you're chayiv on Shabbos. L'Rabbanan b'kli. According to the Rabbanan, this is how much hair fills up a professional hair cutting implement. Rabbi Elazar af biyad v'zel shira, and according to Rabbi Elazar, who says that even removing hair biyad is also, it's how many hairs are prohibited. Rabbi Errol, yes.
I hope until Motzei Shabbos you'll forgive me for this question. What can you and can't you do with a wig?
Why are you assuming there's anything that you can or can't do with a wig?
Well, I know
Oh, you
here
mean
you're referring to your own hair, but you're dealing
correct?
with pulling with hair.
We're talking right now only about your own hair. If it's hair that's a wig or a toupee or how do you call it? What do you call it? Highlights? Not highlights. Extensions. That's not what we're talking about now. But if we go back in time, we did have a discussion. Back when we spoke about Bama Isha, we talked about those different things: hair, highlights, extensions, braids, etc. So it's not that the Gemara doesn't discuss it, but it's not. This is not the place. Here we're talking about the actual hair of your own person. So the Tosefta says you're chayiv. The kama mlepiazug. It's the amount of hair that fills up a scissors. And Rabbi Yehuda says it's 2 hairs. And the Gemara asks, we have a problem. There's a brisa that seems to infer otherwise. Now the problem is we don't know that brisa, but Rashi kindly fills us in. Behahi brisa b'seifa. The brisa talks about on Shabbos, you're not allowed to cut hair, 2 hairs. And la karcha, the Torah says, loisasimu karcha, you're not allowed to create a bald spot is an expression of mourning, or loisasimu karcha beinechem lamas. Let's read Rashi for a second. Here's in the Chumash. There's certain hairstyles that are prohibited. You're not allowed to make a baldness between your eyes. In ancient times and to this day, there are certain mourning practices. A person, God forbid, lost a loved one. There were socially warranted or socially accepted methods of displaying grief. And so people used to do make cuts or certain kinds of haircuts, which were a way to announce or display their status as mourners. At least that's the easy. By the way, the Gemara in Kiddushin talks more length, I believe, about this subject. But
let me ask you a question.
Hold on just 1 second. Hold on one second. Just go on.
Okay.
So the Brisa talks about different types of prohibited hair removal. You're not allowed to remove hair on Shabbos. How many hairs? 2. You're not allowed to create this kind of haircut that expresses, again, without going into depth, karcha, this baldness. Shtayim have a karcha, and the Brisa says, you know how many hairs removed could already begin the process of creating this karcha, this prohibited baldness? 2. When you list 2 different measurements with the inferences that they're not the same. So when the Brisa says, Malay piazug is for cutting, and karcha is 2 hairs, you imagine these are 2 different measures. Latanya lekarcha shtayim. Where it says you got to make a small amendment to the Brisa and write v'chein lekarcha shtayim. So Shabbos, you're not allowed to cut malay piazug, which is 2 hairs. V'chein lekarcha shtayim, and the same measure applies for this baldness that is prohibited. You want some more information about v'la karcha, tearing out hair in mourning? No, it's exactly what it is. It's tearing out hair in mourning.
So is that specific to mourning, or is there any view that tells you that there's a prohibition, for instance, to pluck your hair out from your eyebrows if they grow in between the 2 eyes, and that's paid because it says ben enechem.
For the purposes of Shabbos.
Forget Shabbos. I'm talking
so
about
the purposes of Shabbos and for the purposes of this pasuk, I believe it is about grief. We can refer back to Eli's question. Again, I'm not taking a position, but to go back to Eli's question, there are certain questions about types of grooming that are in society considered to be exclusively feminine. So there may be restrictions to those grooming practices that are considered feminine. In a world or a time or a place where it becomes a universal practice, then there's a lot to discuss. Suffice it to say, back to our discussion, how many hairs is a person prohibited from removing biyad according to Rabbi Lazar, or bikli according to the Rabbanan? 2. Tanya nami hachi. Indeed, we have a brisa that makes this point. Rashi says Rabbi Yehuda damar shtayim. Which point? The point of Rabbi Yehuda, which Rabbi Yehuda says that it's shtayim. What's the brisa? A person who plucks, removes hair the size of the piyazug, the opening of a scissors. Chayiv, he's liable for the act of cutting, removing hair on Shabbos. How much hair is that? Shtayim, 2 hairs. So this word shtayim is a supportive text to Rabbi Yehuda, who also says shtayim. Rabbi Lazar disagrees. Rabbi Lazar is more machmir. He says achas, even 1 hair. Rashi, Rabbi Lazar says, I don't care about the scissors, Maisa, 1 hair, that's considered removing hair in Shabbos. So as you might have noticed, Rabbi Lazar is quite machmir in this regard. Rabbi Lazar, but the rabbis who usually say 2 will concede to Rabbi Lazar that even 1 hair cannot be removed when if he's removing a specific hair, a specific white hair among dark hairs. Then the person is looking specifically for that very hair, and that very hair removed makes him look more youthful. Rashi says, because when a person doesn't have white hairs, they don't appear old. And I have to admit, I may be heading in that direction. Why? Because when a person has a white hair, there's nothing to do about it. But when a person is mostly dark hair, but the occasional white hair, reminder
nothing to do with stress, right, Rabbi?
Nothing to do with stress.
Nothing to do with stress. Right. Okay.
I can't remember that far back, so I can't.
There's no Ellie. What?
I can find 1 black hair among the gray, maybe.
What you say,
Ellie,
Rabbi?
what possible stress could exist?
Shalom bayis stress, money stress. You know.
So you're saying there could be stresses. I hear you. Okay. So the Chachamim say, listen, usually 1 hair is inconsequential. 2 hairs, that's already but if you're hunting for a specific hair, they'll agree that also is a prohibited act. Because then he wants to remove that hair. So then he's done the job. Check it out. This activity is even prohibited in the weekday. Why would a person be prohibited from removing a white hair from among dark hairs? Mishon shenemar, yilbash gever simas isha. The Gemara, the Brisa here says that the act of plucking out white hairs should be more of a feminine activity. Rashi v'derech hanoshim lahakbi lakach ulehesna ois. It is more of a feminine activity to be very concerned about the appearance and the removal of the white hairs to look better. The Gemara takes the position that the common male practice is to be a little less consumed with appearance than the feminine instinct to beautify themselves. And that's why I kept on saying, Reb Eli, that I want to avoid the in-depth discussion, because it's a broad and detailed question about a whole variety of different acts, which maybe once upon a time were considered exclusively feminine, and today there are many men that do so as well.
So, Rabbi, in today's world, a man should be careful before he decides to dye his hair?
I'm not saying that, but it is possible. It's a question that if you're willing to ask, you might want to ask it. Rashi, sorry, not Rashi. Hold on. I'm going to show you what the Rambam writes over here. Loisada ish isha ede ish. A woman shouldn't put on male adornments. There were certain clothing in the time of the Rambam, the time of the Mishnah, that were considered hallmark male garments. Certain kinds of headgear, hats, a shield. Nor should a woman shave their head in a manner of men. I know what you're thinking. Hold off on that question. And similarly, a man should not wear women's adornments. In those days, there were certain colors that were considered only for sale in the women's sex side of this, the women's apparel. And certain golden colored clothing. Important line, in a place where men don't wear it, in a place that follows the women. And then the Rambam adds an important line, which is good to note. but it's why it gets complicated. Hakol k'minig haMedina. The important thing to note is that we fought a lot of this question revolves around minig haMedina. It has to do with societal norms. Isha, by the way, this is not the primary place where this is discussed. There's a Gemara, I don't recall where, which there are a number of Gemaras. Actually, I think we had it in Brachas. Did we have it about a woman that was wearing a garment that was considered unacceptable for a Jewish person, and somebody decided to do something about it. I don't know if you recall that. Anyways, Isha ada Isha the Ish like him. Men doing women's adornments and vice versa could receive lashes. This is our Gemara. If you pluck white hairs from among dark hairs, a person shouldn't do so, and they are culpable of this act of doing a feminine activity. Similarly, if a person dyes their hair black, that is, according to the Rambam, based on the Gemara, considered also a prohibited act because it is also akin to feminine activities. So there we have the discussion. All right, let this remain a tease because it's 11 o'clock. My dear friends, thank you all for joining us today on this auspicious 20th of Tevis, Erev Shabbos. If you're not going to be able to join us tonight, I respect it, and I don't want anyone to change from their otherwise established protocol. But do me a favor. Tonight at around 6:20, 6:30, if you'll lift a glass and join us in saying L'chaim and thanking Hashem for the kindness that He does, and ask Hashem to continue to shine His goodness and kindness to our community. We ask Hashem to send good health and good circumstances and good nachas and good communal growth in Torah and in all other ways as well. And so please, if you're home, you'll lift your glass. You'll connect as a community in saying thank you to Hashem and thank you to the wonderful donors who are Hashem's agents. And we'll say thank you to a beautiful community that is so supportive and in a growing mindset. And may Hashem again bless us all. And so whether you're there or not, please feel connected. And at a time where there are questions and challenges, one of the most important therapeutic reactions is to try to channel gratitude. It helps us mitigate the things that we can't control. And so we ask Hashem to give us things to be grateful for. And may Hashem again bless everyone. So good Shabbos. And I am grateful to all of you for being here, for making this Gemara, the conversation, a high caliber, high intensity discussion that covers halacha and thought and archaeology and so many other topics. And again, Hashem should bless you all with the good health and ability to study as we go through the entire Talmud. Shkoyach. Have a wonderful Shabbos. Hope to see you all.
Thank you for allowing me to ask questions I can't ask anywhere else.
Rembero, please don't stop.
Good Shabbos.
Please don't stop. Good Shabbos. Take care.
Good Shabbos, everyone.
Hello, Rebbe Eli.
Oh my God.